African penguins. I assume most of you have watched the movie Mr. Popper's Penguins. Unfortunately, the topic of my speech is not about those penguins. The topic of my speech is about African penguins. The journal New African demonstrates the appearance of penguins by stating, quote, cute little penguins with unique black patterns and spots on their chest, end quote. As you can see, these penguins have the black spots on their chest, and those do not. Another way of telling an African penguin apart is from the unique sounds that they make. Stated by Young in the article South African Wildlife, African penguins, quote, they're commonly known as the jackass penguins because of their distinct braying calls, end quote. Researchers have observed African penguins for many years, learning about their habits and ways of life. By the time I'm done with my speech, you will have learned about the 5 stages of their life cycle, including their mating habits and their habitats where they live and what they consume. To get things started, I would like to teach y'all a little bit about their life cycle. There are 5 stages to their life cycle, and to no surprise, it starts with the egg stage. African penguins usually lay 1 or 2 eggs per clutch. The incubation period lasts from 38 days to 41 days, depending on the egg. Both the female and the male equally hold responsibility for taking care of the eggs. While one is incubating the egg, staying on land, the other one will go out to sea to forage for food for its family. Penguins will typically use the same breeding grounds for many years. They are monogamous creatures, meaning they will mate with the same penguin for the rest of their life. They breed all year round, but February is the peak breeding period. The article, African Penguins, Boulders Beach, Simonstown, South Africa mentions, quote, single penguins will find mates and couples will start breeding in January or February. By April, the colony swells to approximately 1,000 breeding pairs, end quote. The next 2 stages would be the hatchling and chick stage. Once the hatchlings hatch, the chick will now depend on its parents for feeding them for the next 3 months until the growth of its waterproof feathers. When the chick molts into its waterproof feathers, it is now in its juvenile stage. In the juvenile stage, the penguin will now be able to swim without drowning and forage for food with the parents still providing help because it can't do everything on its own quite yet. African penguins will leave the nest for the first time around 70 to 90 days after hatching. After 12 to 22 months at sea, the penguin will now return to its birth colony to molt into their adult plumage, which means their adult feathers. Now being 3 years old, the African penguin is now considered a fully grown adult. Between the ages of 4 to 6 years old, the penguins will now start to mate, continuing the life cycle all over again. The lifespan of these creatures in the wild is around 25 years, but in captivity they can live up to 30 years old. Now you know the life cycle of the African penguins, I will be going over their habitat. I know what all of you are thinking. Where did these African penguins come from? Well, let me tell you, they come from Africa. Daniel Thomas shares a piece of information in his article, A History of Shifting Fortunes for African Penguins. Quote, they are the only species of penguins to share African coastlines with humans for the last 400,000 years, end quote. As you can see here, there's red dots that show the locations of some colonies of penguins. They are the only species of penguin to live in Africa. They are found along the coastal areas and on the offshore islands. They prefer to live on the flat, sandy areas with vegetation growth available, but some also like the very rocky areas with sparse vegetation. As you can see here, there's some vegetation growth there, but then there's also the rocky, no vegetation areas. It just depends on the colony that they grew up in. African penguins live in the subtropical climate. The land is usually warm, but the currents are cool. Their preferred temperatures range around 42 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. When making a nest, they like to dig burrows to provide shelter against predators like seagulls and mongoose. It also provides protection against the elements like the heat from the sun. Due to them still being penguins, they cannot handle the full heat of the sun. Their nests are made primarily out of guano, meaning waste from seabirds, or also known as poop from seabirds. The penguin's nest might not seem like much, but that is due to them spending 75% of their lifetime in the water instead of on land. And as you can see here are some of the burrows that they use, and there's a penguin in water. This brings up the topic of our next subject, the diet of the African penguins. Being a fast swimmer, this allows the penguins to catch a variety of prey from the sea. They can hold their breaths for over 2 minutes long and dive at depths of over 400 feet deep. The African penguins eat small fish such as anchovies, horse mackerel, and herring. In the article, Local Forage Fish Abundance Influence Foraging Efforts and Offspring Conditions in Endangered Marine Predators, Sylvia Cavallo states, quote, "The penguins' main prey are sardines and anchovies," end quote. They may also supplement their diet with squid and small crustaceans if the fish in their area have decreased in abundance, which will do from the people foraging for fish and them over foraging for themselves. Researchers have learned about the African penguins through their diet studies. Malay Conan explains in her article, Reprisal of the Trophic Ecology of one of the world's most threatened sphinxids, the African penguin, quote, "African penguins' dietary studies have relied on the identification of prey remains from the stomach contents," end quote. The amount of fish consumed by penguins depends on the species. If you have, let's say, an emperor penguin, which is like a super tall penguin compared to the African penguins, they eat about 6 to 7 pounds of fish, while African penguins eat about 1 pound of fish per day. Penguins also have no teeth, to surprise you guys. They have little sharp, like spike-like things in their mouth that point backwards, so when they eat the fish can't go wiggle out, there's only one way down. And these are some of the fish. You got the herring, you got some squid and sardines and anchovies. Speaking out about the African penguins has now provided you with a knowledge of the different stages of the species' life, from the egg stage to hatchling, from the juvenile all the way up to the adult stage of its life. I also provided the knowledge about where they live, whether it's a nice flat vegetation area or a rocky, steep area with no vegetation. They are also provided the knowledge of the variety of fish that they eat and consume. I hope you now understand why the African penguin is so much more memorable than the Gen 2 penguins from the movie Mr. Popper's Penguins. Next time you head on over to the Como Zoo or the Minnesota Zoo, you will understand some basic information on these interesting birds. These are my sites I used for my research and quotes. Thank you for listening.